The massive alien ship filled the view screen like a floating city made of crystal and metal. Kim Tae-ho pressed his face against the small window of his transport shuttle and felt his stomach twist with nerves. The Veltharian flagship Crimson Nebula was bigger than anything he had ever seen. Its red and purple lights blinked in patterns that hurt his human eyes to look at directly. "First time seeing a Veltharian capital ship?" asked Ambassador Park Jin-woo, sitting across from him. The older man's voice was calm, but Tae-ho could see worry lines around his eyes. "Yes, sir," Tae-ho replied. He pulled at the collar of his formal diplomatic uniform. The fabric felt strange against his skin. "It's much larger than I expected." Park Jin-woo nodded slowly. "The Veltharians like to show their power. Their empire is old, Tae-ho. Much older than our human civilization. They have technology we can barely understand and control 17 star systems." Tae-ho looked down at his hands. They were shaking, slightly. In just a few hours he would marry Queen Zelara of the Veltharian Empire. The marriage was not about love. It was about peace between humans and aliens. The weight of his entire species rested on his shoulders. "Are you ready for this?" Park Jin-woo asked gently. "I have to be," Tae-ho answered. "The peace treaty depends on it." The shuttle docked with a soft bump. Through the airlock came 3 Veltharian guards. They were tall, almost 3 meters high, with skin that looked like purple crystal. Each guard had 4 arms and wore armor that seemed to be made of living metal. Their faces were beautiful but cold, like carved statues. "Human delegation," one guard spoke in broken English. "Follow. No sudden moves." Tae-ho and the human diplomats walked through corridors that curved and twisted in ways that made no sense. The walls glowed with soft light, and strange music played from hidden speakers. Other aliens moved through the halls, some with tentacles, instead of arms, others with multiple heads and creatures that looked like walking plants. They all stopped and stared when the humans passed. Tae-ho heard whispers in languages he did not understand, but the tone was clear. They thought humans were weak, inferior, a young species that barely deserved notice. The throne room was enormous. The ceiling stretched up so high that it disappeared into darkness. Hundreds of aliens filled the space, diplomats, nobles, and representatives from dozens of species. At the center of it all sat Queen Zelara on a throne made of floating crystal. Tae-ho's breath caught in his throat when he saw her. Queen Zelara was the most beautiful and terrifying being he had ever encountered. She was tall like all Veltharians, with skin that shifted between purple and blue like a living jewel. Her forearms moved gracefully as she gestured, and her large eyes seemed to look right through him. A crown of pure energy floated above her head, casting dancing shadows on her face. "Approach, human," Queen Zelara commanded. Her voice was like music, but there was no warmth in it. Tae-ho walked forward, on unsteady legs. He had practiced the proper greeting ceremony hundreds of times, but now his mind went blank. He stumbled slightly and heard snickers from the alien crowd. His face burned with embarrassment. When he reached the throne, Tae-ho tried to bow in the Veltharian fashion. He crossed his arms over his chest and lowered his head, but he did it wrong. He was supposed to hold the position for exactly 10 seconds, but he lost count and stood up too early. Queen Zylara's expression did not change, but he saw disappointment in her eyes. "You are Kim Tae-ho of Earth?" she asked. "Yes, Your Majesty," Tae-ho replied. His voice cracked like a teenager's. "You appear young," the queen said. Some of the alien nobles laughed. "Are you certain your species selected the correct representative?" Ambassador Park Jin-woo stepped forward. "Your Majesty, Tae-ho is one of our finest cultural attachés. He has studied Veltharian customs extensively." "Has he?" Queen Zelara stood up from her throne. She was so tall that Tae-ho had to crane his neck to look at her face. "Then he knows that in our marriage ceremony, the groom must demonstrate his worthiness through combat?" Tae-ho's heart sank. No one had mentioned combat. He looked back at Park Jin-woo, who looked just as surprised and worried. I was not informed of this requirement, Your Majesty," Tae-ho said quietly. The queen's forearms spread wide. "Of course. Humans are not a warrior species. We shall modify the tradition." She gestured to her guards. "Bring the ceremonial weapons." The guards returned carrying strange devices that hummed with energy. Queen Zylara selected one, a staff that crackled with purple lightning. She moved with fluid grace, spinning the weapon in complex patterns that left trails of light in the air. "In Veltharian culture," she explained while demonstrating, "strength is the foundation of all relationships. We show our power to prove we can protect our mates." Other alien nobles stepped forward and began their own displays. A creature with tentacles instead of arms lifted massive stone blocks with its mind. A being made of living fire danced through the air, leaving burning symbols that hung in space. Each demonstration was more impressive than the last. Finally, all eyes turned to Tae-ho. He stood there holding an energy staff that felt heavy and awkward in his human hands. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The alien crowd waited in silence that felt hostile. Tae-ho lifted the staff and tried to copy the queen's movements. The weapon slipped from his grip and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed through the throne room. Some aliens laughed openly now. "Pathetic," he heard someone whisper. "The great queen must mate with this weak creature?" Queen Zylara picked up the fallen weapon and handed it back to Tae-ho. For a moment their hands touched and he thought he saw something softer in her eyes. Pity, maybe. "The ceremony will proceed," Queen Zylara announced. "Political necessity requires compromise." The wedding ritual was long and complex. Tae-ho fumbled through responses in broken Veltharian while hundreds of aliens watched. He mixed up the order of the vows and pronounced the ancient words incorrectly. Each mistake brought more whispers and snickers from the crowd. When it was over, Queen Zylara placed a crystal band on Tae-ho's finger. It felt cold against his skin and glowed with faint purple light. "You are now my consort," she said formally. "May this union bring peace between our peoples." Tae-ho bowed again, this time managing to do it correctly. "I will do my best to honor you and your people, Your Majesty." "See that you do," Queen Zylara replied. Then, more quietly, she added, "You will need to learn quickly if you wish to survive here." As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Tae-ho caught fragments of conversations in various languages. The words weak, inferior, and pet human came up repeatedly. He kept his face calm, but inside, his heart was racing. Ambassador Park Jin-woo approached him. "The first step is complete," he said quietly. "Now the real work begins." Tae-ho nodded and looked up at his new wife. Queen Zylara was speaking with her advisors, her forearms gesturing elegantly as she discussed matters of state. She seemed so powerful, so confident. He felt like a child standing next to a goddess. But the marriage was done. The treaty was signed. For better or worse, he was now part of the Veltharian royal family. All he could do was hope that he would not disappoint his people or bring shame to his new position. The first part of his mission was complete. Now he had to survive the rest. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding ceremony, and Tae-ho was slowly getting used to life aboard the massive Veltharian flagship. His new quarters were larger than his entire apartment back on Earth, with walls that changed color based on his mood and furniture that adjusted itself automatically for his smaller human frame. Every morning, Queen Zylara's personal tutor, an ancient Veltharian named Kethvar, arrived to teach Tae-ho about alien customs and languages. The old being had 6 eyes and spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes, but he was patient with Tae-ho's mistakes. "Remember," Kethvar said during one lesson, "when greeting a Nexari trade representative, you must never look directly at their third eye. It is considered a challenge to combat." Tae-ho wrote this down in his notebook, along with hundreds of other rules he had learned. Each alien species had different customs, different ways of showing respect or giving insult. One wrong gesture could start a war. "This is very complicated," Tae-ho said, rubbing his temples. "How do you remember all of this?" "Practice," Kethvar replied with what might have been a smile. "Your queen learned these things over many decades. You have had only weeks. You are doing better than expected for a human." That afternoon, Taeho attended his first major diplomatic meeting as Queen Xylara's consort. The conference room was filled with representatives from 12 different species, all discussing trade agreements and border disputes. Queen Xylara sat at the head of the long table, her forearms moving gracefully as she gestured during her speech. She looked magnificent in her formal robes, which seemed to be made of liquid starlight. Taeho sat beside her in a smaller chair, taking notes and trying to follow the rapid conversation. The Krillian ambassador was a large creature that looked like a cross between a spider and an octopus. His many tentacles waved as he spoke. The mining rights in the Kepler system must be renegotiated. The current terms favor the Veltharians too heavily. The terms were agreed upon fairly, Queen Xylara replied coolly. If the Krillian Empire finds them unsatisfactory, perhaps they should improve their mining efficiency. The ambassador's tentacles turned a darker shade of purple, which Taeho had learned meant anger. Easy words from someone who keeps a pet, human at her side. The ambassador said with a nasty laugh, "Does your little mammal have opinions on mining operations?" The room went quiet. All eyes turned to Taeho, who felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. He looked down at his notes and said nothing. Queen Xylara's skin shifted to a dangerous red color. "My consort is here to learn about galactic politics. Show respect or this meeting is over." The Nexari trade prince, who had 3 heads and golden scales, laughed softly. "Peace, friends. We all know humans are useful for simple tasks. Perhaps the queen's pet can fetch us refreshments." More laughter rippled around the table. Taeho's hands clenched into fists under the table, but he kept his expression calm. He had been warned that this would happen. Humans were seen as the weakest species in known space. "I am fine where I am," Taeho said quietly. "Thank you for the suggestion." The meeting continued for several more hours. Taeho listened carefully and took detailed notes, but he spoke only when directly asked a question. Even then, his answers were brief and polite. Several times he noticed Queen Xylara glancing at him with what might have been disappointment. Later that evening, Queen Xylara invited Taeho to her private chambers for dinner. The room was beautiful, with walls that showed views of distant nebulae and soft music that seemed to come from the air itself. "You were very quiet today," Queen Xylara said as they ate. The food was strange but delicious. Fruits that glowed softly and meat that tasted like nothing from Earth. "I am still learning," Taeho replied. "I do not want to say something foolish and cause problems." "The other ambassadors do not respect you," Queen Xylara said bluntly. "They see humans as weak, as pets," Taeho nodded. "I know, but respect must be earned, not given." Something flickered in Queen Xylara's large eyes. "An interesting perspective. How do humans earn respect?" "Through our actions," Taeho said, "not through boasting or displays of power." Queen Xylara was quiet for a long moment. "Your people survived first contact with the galaxy despite being technologically inferior. That suggests hidden strengths." "We adapt quickly," Taeho said, "and we learn from our mistakes." Over the following days, Queen Xylara began to show Taeho more personal aspects of Veltharian culture. She took him to the meditation chambers, beautiful rooms filled with floating crystals that sang in harmony. She showed him ancient artifacts from her people's history, weapons and art from civilizations that had fallen long before humans learned to make fire. "This belonged to my great-grandmother," Queen Xylara said, holding up a delicate crown made of crystallized light. "She ruled during the War of 7 Suns, when our empire nearly fell to the Void Crawlers." "What happened to the Void Crawlers?" Taeho asked. "We destroyed them completely," Queen Xylara said simply. "When the Veltharian Empire is threatened, we show no mercy." Taeho studied the crown carefully, noting its construction and the way the light moved through its structure. "It's beautiful," he said, "and terrifying." "Power often is," Queen Xylara replied. Dr. Lee So-young, the human medical officer assigned to the diplomatic mission, had been conducting regular health checks on Taeho. During one examination, she frowned at her scanner readings. "Something wrong?" Taeho asked. Your bone density is much higher than normal human baseline, Dr. Lee said quietly. And these neural pathway readings are unusual. Unusual how? Taeho asked, though his voice remained calm. Like someone rewired your entire nervous system for faster reflexes and enhanced processing speed. Dr. Lee looked at him carefully. Are you going to tell me what's really going on? Just genetic variations, Taeho said. Nothing to worry about. Dr. Lee made a note in his file but said nothing more. She had worked with the diplomatic corps long enough to know when not to ask questions. During another diplomatic gathering, this time with representatives from the Hegemony Council, Taeho noticed something that made him pay closer attention. The Arcturus delegate kept checking a small device hidden in his robes. The device beeped in a pattern that seemed familiar, though Taeho could not place where he had heard it before. When the delegate thought no one was looking, he sent a quick message on the device. Taeho caught only a glimpse, but the symbols looked like military code, the kind used for troop movements and battle coordination. That night, Taeho lay awake thinking about what he had seen. His mind worked through the possibilities, analyzing patterns and connections in ways that surprised him. Why would a trade delegate need military communication codes? Queen Zilara lay sleeping beside him, her forearms arranged gracefully around her body. She breathed slowly and peacefully, occasionally making soft sounds in her native language. Over the weeks, she had begun to treat him with more warmth, sharing stories of her childhood and asking about human customs. But Taeho could not shake the feeling that something dangerous was coming. The suspicious behavior of various delegates, the increased security around the flagship, and the way conversations stopped when he entered rooms all suggested growing tensions. He thought about his training back on Earth, lessons that seemed almost like dreams now. His instructors had taught him to watch for signs, to read between lines, to prepare for threats that others could not see. A soft alarm sounded from the ship's communication system. Emergency frequencies were activating across the fleet. Taeho sat up in bed, his senses suddenly sharp and alert. Whatever was coming, it would test everything he had learned, and perhaps reveal more about himself than he was ready to share. Queen Zilara stirred beside him. What is happening? She asked, sleepily. I don't know yet, Taeho replied. But something deep in his mind was already preparing for war. The emergency alarms had been sounding for 3 hours when the first reports came in. Taeho stood in the command center beside Queen Zilara, watching as panicked messages flooded the communication screens from across the galaxy. Kepler 442 is gone, announced Commander Veltar, Queen Zilara's military advisor. His forearms worked frantically over the control panels. The entire colony, 20 million beings, all dead or missing. Queen Zilara's skin shifted to a deep purple, the color of fear among her people. What happened to them? Unknown enemy ships appeared 3 days ago, Commander Veltar replied. The colony's distress signal lasted only minutes before everything went silent. On the main screen, images appeared from the destroyed world. Where once stood gleaming cities and green farmlands, now there was only twisted metal and gray ash. Strange organic structures had grown over the ruins like giant mushrooms, pulsing with sickly yellow light. My God, whispered Ambassador Park Jinwoo, who had arrived with other human diplomats. What could do this? More reports came in throughout the day. The Rigel system had gone dark. A Krillian mining station had sent a final message filled with screaming before the signal cut out. 3 more colonies had vanished without a trace. They call themselves the Devourers, said Admiral Thexola of the Veltharian Second Fleet. She had arrived that morning with terrible news from the front lines. They consume everything in their path. Organic matter, technology, even the minerals in the planets themselves. The War Council that evening was filled with fear and confusion. Representatives from 16 different species sat around the massive table, all talking at once. Maps of the galaxy showed red zones where Devourer forces had been spotted. The red was spreading like an infection. We need to combine our fleets, urged the Nexari trade prince. Individual species cannot fight this threat alone. The Nexari have only merchant vessels, sneered the Krillian ambassador. What use are cargo ships against these monsters? More use than Krillian pride, shot back the trade prince. Queen Zylara raised one of her 4 hands for silence. Fighting among ourselves serves only the enemy. We must work together. Admiral Choi Byung-ho of the Terran Defense Fleet leaned forward. He was an older human with gray hair and tired eyes. What do we know about their technology? Their weaknesses? They adapt, Admiral Thexola said grimly. Energy weapons work for the first few shots, then they become useless. Projectile weapons last longer, but they eventually develop armor. Even nuclear weapons only slow them down. How is that possible? Asked Dr. Lee So-young, who was attending the meeting as the human medical expert. They are part machine, part organism, Commander Veltar explained. They learn from every attack and share that knowledge instantly across their entire force. Fighting them is like fighting an enemy that gets stronger with each battle. Tai-ho sat quietly in his designated chair, listening to the discussion while taking careful notes. Officially, he was there only as Queen Zylara's consort, but the other delegates barely acknowledged his presence. They were used to ignoring him by now, but Tai-ho was paying very close attention. The attack patterns described by the survivors reminded him of something from his studies, old military strategies from Earth's history. The way the Devourers struck multiple targets simultaneously, cut supply lines, and adapted to enemy tactics was familiar. If I may ask a question, Tai-ho said quietly during a brief pause in the argument. Several delegates looked annoyed at the interruption. The Krillian ambassador's tentacles twitched with irritation. The pet human wishes to speak. Queen Zylara shot the ambassador a dangerous look. My consort has permission to participate in this council. Thank you, Tai-ho said politely. I was wondering about the timing of the attacks. Do the Devourers strike at random, or is there a pattern? Admiral Thexola consulted her datapad. They hit the outer colonies first, then moved inward. Standard invasion tactics. But which colonies specifically? Tai-ho asked. Were they the richest, the most heavily defended, the most strategically important? The admiral frowned and began checking the records more carefully. Actually, they targeted the resource production centers first. Mining worlds, agricultural planets, manufacturing hubs. Like cutting off food supplies before attacking the main army, Tai-ho said thoughtfully. Admiral Choi Byung-ho gave Tai-ho a sharp look. Where did you learn military strategy? I read about historical battles as a hobby, Tai-ho replied smoothly. This reminds me of tactics used in the ancient wars on Earth. Ancient human wars, scoffed the Nexari trade prince. What could primitive tribal conflicts teach us about galactic warfare? Sometimes old ideas work in new situations, Tai-ho said mildly. The meeting continued for hours with little progress. Each species wanted to protect their own territory first. The Krillians insisted on defending their industrial worlds. The Nexari wanted to evacuate their trade routes. The Arcturus Collective proposed retreating to fortified positions and waiting for the Devourers to overextend themselves. Queen Zylara listened to all the arguments with growing frustration. We are thinking like separate species instead of unified allies, she said finally. The Devourers will destroy us one by one if we cannot coordinate our response. 3 days later, the worst fears came true. The combined fleet of the Krillian 3rd Battle Group and 2 Nexari destroyer squadrons engaged a Devourer force near the Vega system. The battle lasted 6 hours and ended in complete disaster. Only 17 ships escaped, reported Commander Veltar, his voice hollow with shock. Out of 143 vessels, the Devourers captured or destroyed the rest. The news sent panic through the Alliance. 2 more species announced they were withdrawing their forces to defend their home systems. The Arcturus Collective formally requested permission to negotiate a separate peace with the Devourers. There will be no separate peace, Queen Zylara declared angrily. These creatures do not negotiate, they consume. That night, Queen Zylara sat in her private study, staring at star charts and battle reports. Her forearms moved restlessly as she tried to find some solution to the growing crisis. Taeho brought her a cup of the herbal tea she favored when stressed. "Thank you," she said quietly, accepting the cup with one hand while continuing to work with the others. Taeho studied the charts over her shoulder. "The Devourers are moving faster than anyone expected." "They will reach the core systems within weeks," Queen Zalara agreed. "My people, your people, everyone will be consumed." "There has to be something we can do," Taeho said. "Some weakness we haven't found yet." Queen Zalara looked up at him, and for the first time since their marriage, he saw real vulnerability in her eyes. "I have ruled for 30 years. I have fought pirates and rebels and hostile species. But this, I do not know how to fight an enemy that adapts to everything we do." Taeho sat down beside her, something he would never have dared to do in public. "You're not fighting them alone. The entire galaxy is working together." "Are we?" Queen Zalara asked bitterly. "Half the alliance is ready to run away. The other half argues about who should take the greatest risks." Taeho was quiet for a moment, studying the tactical displays with an intensity that surprised Queen Zalara. His eyes moved across the data with the focus of someone analyzing a complex puzzle. "What if the arguments are part of the problem?" he said finally. "What do you mean?" "Everyone is thinking about how to fight the Devourers," Taeho explained. "But maybe we should think about why they can be fought at all." Queen Zalara turned to face him fully. "I do not understand." "They adapt to our weapons and tactics," Taeho said, his voice growing more confident. "But they still need to learn from experience. That means there's a delay between when we try something new and when they develop a counter. If we could coordinate attacks across multiple fronts simultaneously, using different approaches, they could not adapt quickly enough." Queen Zalara finished, her eyes widening with understanding. "It would require perfect timing and communication," Taeho continued, "and everyone would have to trust the plan completely." Queen Zalara stared at him with a new expression, surprise mixed with something like respect. "How did you think of this?" Taeho felt a moment of panic. His analysis had been too detailed, too sophisticated for a simple cultural attaché. I've been reading the battle reports carefully. Sometimes an outside perspective helps." Before Queen Zalara could respond, emergency alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Red lights flashed and urgent voices crackled over the communication system. "All hands to battle stations. Devourer fleet detected. Massive force approaching. All hands to battle stations." Through the window of the study, Taeho could see space itself seeming to writhe and twist. Dark shapes were emerging from hyperspace, ships that looked more like living creatures than machines. They were huge, easily the size of small moons, with surfaces that pulsed and shifted like skin. The Devourers had found them. Queen Zalara stood up, her forearms already reaching for her command staff. "This is it," she said grimly. "Today we discover if the galaxy will survive." Taeho watched the approaching enemy fleet and felt something stirring deep in his mind, instincts and knowledge he had kept buried for months. The time for pretending was almost over. The Devourer fleet filled the entire view screen like a living nightmare. Dozens of bioships the size of cities moved through space with impossible grace, their surfaces rippling and changing as they approached. Smaller craft swarmed around, them like insects, each one bristling with organic weapons that pulsed with sickly light. "Shields at maximum power," Queen Zalara commanded from her position at the center of the bridge. "All weapons ready. Send the evacuation signal to the civilian ships." The Crimson Nebula shuddered as the first enemy weapons struck their defensive barriers. The lights flickered and sparks flew from damaged control panels. Around them, the combined fleet of Allied ships returned fire desperately, their energy beams and missiles lighting up the darkness of space. Taeho stood near the back of the bridge, officially there as an observer, but actually studying the tactical displays with growing concern. The Allied fleet was badly outnumbered, and the Devourer ships were already adapting to their weapons. Energy beams that had burned through enemy hulls minutes ago were now being absorbed harmlessly. "Their shields are strengthening," shouted Commander Veltar. Switching to kinetic weapons. The battle raged for 2 hours with the Allied forces slowly losing ground. Ship after ship fell to the relentless Devourer assault. The enemy creatures seemed to learn from every attack, developing new defenses and countermeasures with terrifying speed. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported a technician. "Emergency teams responding." Another massive impact threw everyone on the bridge to the floor. When Tae-ho picked himself up, he saw that Queen Zalara's command chair had been damaged. Sparks flew from the broken electronics, and one of her 4 arms hung limply at her side. "Medical team to the bridge," Commander Veltar called out. "No time," Queen Zalara said through gritted teeth. "Status report." "Shields down to 30%, Veltar replied grimly. "We've lost half the escort fleet. The Nexari destroyers are retreating." "Cowards," spat Admiral Thexola. "Without them, we cannot maintain our defensive formation." Through the chaos, Tae-ho heard the distinctive sound that meant boarding pods were attaching to the hull. The Devourers were not content to simply destroy the flagship. They wanted to capture it intact. "They're boarding us," he said quietly. "All security teams to repel boarders," Queen Zylara commanded. "Seal off the command sections." But it was too late. The first Devourer drones broke through the hull on the lower decks and began moving toward Go, the bridge. These creatures were nightmares made real. Part machine and part living flesh with multiple arms ending in razor-sharp claws and weapons that grew directly from their bodies. The ship's internal sensors showed the drones cutting through security teams like wheat before a scythe. Their biomechanical bodies adapted quickly to each weapon used against them, developing new armor and resistances within minutes. "They'll be here soon," Commander Veltar said, checking his sidearm. "Your Majesty, you should evacuate to the escape pods." "I will not abandon my ship," Queen Zylara replied firmly. More explosions rocked the vessel. The main lights went out, replaced by emergency illumination that cast everything in a hellish red glow. Through the bridge's reinforced doors came the sound of battle, energy weapons firing, aliens screaming, and the terrible chittering noise the Devourer drones made as they communicated with each other. The doors exploded inward in a shower of metal fragments. 6 Devourer drones poured through the opening, their multiple eyes scanning the bridge for targets. They moved with insect-like quickness, their claws clicking on the metal floor. Queen Zalara raised her energy staff with her 3 good arms and fired at the lead drone. The blast struck its center mass but did little damage. Its adaptive armor had already encountered this weapon type and developed immunity. Commander Veltar and the bridge crew opened fire with everything they had. Plasma bolts, particle beams, and kinetic rounds filled the air. The drones staggered under the assault but kept coming, their wounds healing even as they advanced. "Weapons ineffective," Veltar shouted. "They're adapting too fast." One drone leaped across the bridge with impossible speed, its claws reaching for Queen Zalara's throat. She tried to dodge, but her injured arm threw off her balance. The creature's talons were inches from her face when something moved between them. Tae-ho. But this was not the nervous, clumsy diplomat who had stumbled through the wedding ceremony. This was something else entirely. A predator unleashed. He moved, faster than the alien eye could follow, his body flowing like water around the drone's attack. One hand struck the creature's joint with surgical precision, and the entire limb went limp. Before the drone could react, Tae-ho's other hand found its central processor and crushed it. The drone collapsed, twitching. The remaining 5 drones turned toward this new threat, but Tae-ho was already moving. He rolled under the second drone's sweeping claws, came up behind it, and drove his fingers into the gap where its biomechanical spine connected to its skull. The creature dropped, instantly. The third drone fired an energy weapon at point-blank range. Tae-ho twisted aside so fast he seemed to blur, the beam missing him by millimeters. He grabbed the drone's weapon arm and used it as leverage to spin the creature around, slamming it into the 4th drone with enough force to shatter both of their internal systems. The 5th drone tried to retreat, perhaps recognizing that it faced something beyond its ability to adapt to. Tae-ho covered the distance between them in a single bound that would have been impossible for any normal human. His strike hit the drone's central core with pinpoint accuracy, and it collapsed in a shower of sparks and organic fluid. The sixth and final drone managed to slash at Taeho with its claws, but he caught the appendage in mid-strike. The reinforced biometal that could cut through starship armor crumpled in his grip like paper. He ended the creature's existence with casual efficiency. 6 drones. Less than 30 seconds. No weapons, except his bare hands. The bridge was silent, except for the distant sounds of battle elsewhere in the ship. Queen Zylara stared at her husband in complete shock. Commander Veltar's mouth hung open. The bridge crew looked like they had just witnessed a miracle. Taeho straightened up and brushed organic residue off his diplomatic uniform, which somehow remained perfectly neat, despite the battle. For a moment, his face showed no expression, at all. Cold, calculating, deadly. Then he seemed to remember where he was, and the familiar nervous smile returned. "Are you hurt, Your Majesty?" he asked, his voice returning to its usual polite tone. Queen Zylara could not speak. She had just watched her supposedly weak human husband destroy 6 Devourer drones with his bare hands, drones that had easily defeated her elite guards. "The bridge is secure," Taeho continued, as if what had just happened was perfectly normal. He walked to the communications console and began entering commands with the speed and precision of someone who had done this thousands of times before. "What are you doing?" Commander Veltar finally managed to ask. "Coordinating the counterattack," Taeho replied. His fingers flew over the alien controls as he accessed fleet communication networks and tactical systems. "All ships, this is Command 7. Implement defensive pattern Omega-3. Target coordinates are being transmitted now." "How do you know our military codes?" Queen Zylara whispered. Taeho paused for a moment, his hand still on the controls. When he turned to face her, his eyes were different, harder, more focused, ancient despite his young face. "Because I helped write them," he said quietly. Over the ship's communication system, his voice rang out with absolute authority. "All ships, all units. This is operational command. Execute synchronized strike pattern 7 Alpha. Timing marks are now." Throughout the fleet, captains and admirals who had never heard of synchronized strike pattern 7 Alpha somehow found themselves following the orders without question. The precision and confidence in that voice demanded obedience. The tide of battle began to turn. Instead of fighting individual skirmishes, the Allied ships moved with perfect coordination. They struck the Devourer fleet from multiple angles simultaneously, using weapons and tactics the enemy had not yet encountered. Before the bioships could adapt to one approach, they were hit by 3 others. "Impossible," breathed Admiral Thexola over the communication channel. How did the human know exactly when and where to strike? Taeho continued issuing orders with machine-like precision, coordinating the movements of hundreds of ships across dozens of light minutes of space. He seemed to see the entire battle in his mind, predicting enemy movements and Allied responses with uncanny accuracy. Within an hour, the Devourer fleet was in full retreat. The bioships that had seemed invincible were now fleeing through hyperspace, leaving behind the wreckage of their fallen. When the last enemy vessel disappeared, Taeho finally stepped away from the communications console. The cold, commanding presence that had taken control during the battle faded away, replaced by the familiar nervousness. I can explain," he said quietly, looking at Queen Zylara's shocked expression. "Yes," Queen Zylara said, her voice barely controlled. "You can, and you will." Queen Zylara's private chambers had never felt so tense. The battle was over, the Devourer fleet was gone, and the immediate crisis had passed. But now, in the quiet aftermath, Queen Zylara sat across from her husband and wondered if she had ever truly known him at all. Taeho looked smaller somehow, sitting in the large alien chair with his hands folded in his lap. The terrifying efficiency he had displayed during the battle was gone, replaced by the nervous young man she thought she had married. But Queen Zylara could not forget what she had seen. The impossible speed, the deadly precision, the command, presence that had turned the tide of an entire war. "Start talking," she said quietly. Her forearms were crossed, and her skin had shifted to the deep blue color that meant she was trying to stay calm. Taeho took a deep breath. My real name is Kim Taeho. That part was not a lie, but I am not just a cultural attaché for the Terran Federation. Obviously, Queen Zalara said dryly. I am part of a program called Genesis, Taeho continued. When humanity made first contact with the galaxy 50 years ago, we discovered something terrifying. We were the youngest intelligent species by millions of years. Every other civilization had technology, psychic powers, or physical abilities that made them vastly superior to normal humans. Queen Zylara listened in silence, her large eyes never leaving his face. The human leadership realized that we would always be seen as weak, Taeho said. Inferior. A species to be protected or pitied but never respected as equals. So they created Project Genesis. What kind of project? Queen Zylara asked. A way to compress evolution, Taeho replied. Instead of waiting millions of years to naturally develop the abilities we needed to survive in the galaxy, we created them artificially. Genetic enhancement, neural conditioning, psychological programming. All begun before birth and continued through childhood and adolescence. Taeho stood up and walked to the window that showed the stars. There are others like me scattered throughout human diplomatic and military services. Dr. Lee So-young, who has been monitoring my health. Admiral Choi Byung-ho, who commands the Terran Defense Fleet. Dozens of others in positions where they can protect human interests. You are weapons, Queen Zylara said. It was not a question. We are protectors, Taeho corrected gently. Enhanced humans designed to ensure our species' survival in a dangerous galaxy. Queen Zylara was quiet for a long moment processing this information. The wedding, the marriage treaty, was any of it real? Taeho turned back to face her. The treaty is real. The peace between our peoples is real. But yes, my assignment here was part of a larger strategy. To spy on us? To learn about potential threats, Taeho said, and to be in position to help if those threats emerged. Queen Zylara's skin shifted to angry red. You deceived me. You deceived my entire people. Yes, Taeho admitted. I am sorry for that. Sorry. Queen Zylara stood up, her full height making her tower over him. You made me look like a fool. All those times you stumbled through ceremonies. All those moments when other species laughed at both of us because of your apparent weakness. It was all an act. It was necessary, Taeho said quietly. If other species knew what humans were truly capable of, they would see us as a threat instead of allies. And what are humans truly capable of? Queen Zylara demanded. Taeho hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. We can match or exceed any other species in the galaxy when we need to. Enhanced humans like myself have physical abilities that rival the strongest warrior races, intelligence that can compete with the most advanced civilizations, and adaptability that surpasses even the most successful species. Then why hide it? Because fear breeds hostility, Taeho explained. If the galaxy knew that the weak young species could actually challenge anyone, they would unite against us. We chose to appear harmless while secretly preparing for threats like the Devourers. Queen Zylara sat back down, her anger giving way to thoughtfulness. How many others know about this? Very few. Most humans believe the Genesis individuals are simply talented people who got lucky. Only the highest levels of government and military know the truth. And the Devourers? Did you know they were coming? We knew something like them was possible, Taeho said. Ancient species leave behind evidence of past threats. We found records of similar enemies that had emerged from the Galactic Rim in previous eras. We prepared for the possibility. Queen Zylara looked at him with new understanding. That is why you asked those questions in the war councils. You were not learning. You were analyzing. Yes, I was looking for patterns, trying to determine the best way to coordinate a response. And your suggestions about synchronized attacks? Based on human military history but adapted for galactic warfare. Teho admitted. The Devourer's ability to adapt quickly was their strength, but also their weakness. If we could hit them with more new tactics than they could process at once, we could overwhelm their adaptation mechanisms. Queen Zylara was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the stars where the battle had taken place. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but sad. Do you have any genuine feelings for me? Or was that part of your mission as well? Teho moved closer to her, his expression earnest. The mission brought us together, but my feelings for you are real. Over these weeks, I have come to respect and care for you more than I ever expected. How can I believe anything you say now? Because I am telling you the truth, Teho said simply. I could have maintained the deception. The crisis is over, and there would be no need to reveal myself. But I chose to trust you with the truth. Queen Zylara studied his face carefully. What happens now? Do you return to Earth and report on everything you learned about Veltharian military capabilities? I report on the Devourer threat and how it was defeated, Teho said. But my primary mission now is to help maintain the alliance that saved us all. And us? What about our marriage? Teho took one of her 4 hands in both of his smaller ones. That depends on whether you can accept who I really am. Queen Zylara looked down at their joined hands. You are still the same person who brought me tea when I was stressed, who listened to stories about my ancestors, who showed genuine curiosity about my people's culture. Yes, but you are also someone who can kill 6 battle drones with his bare hands and coordinate a fleet action across multiple star systems. Also yes. Queen Zylara was quiet again. Finally, she said, the galaxy is going to change now. Other species will want to know how the Devourers were defeated so decisively. We anticipated that, Teho said. The official story is that human tactical analysis combined with alien technology and courage to create new strategies. A partial truth, the best kind of deception. Queen Zylara looked at him with something that might have been admiration. Your species is more clever than anyone realized. We had to be. We started this game at a severe disadvantage. And now? Teho smiled, and for the first time since the revelation, it looked completely genuine. Now we are partners, equals. The Devourer crisis proved that the galaxy needs cooperation between all species, not dominance by anyone. Queen Zylara stood up and walked to her communications console. I could expose everything. Tell the other species what humans really are. You could, Teho agreed. I would not try to stop you. But you do not think I will. I think you are too intelligent to start a new conflict when we have just ended a war, Teho said. And I hope you care enough about our people's future to give this new alliance a chance. Queen Zylara activated the console and began composing a message. I am calling for a new diplomatic conference. All species that participated in defeating the Devourers. We need to establish formal procedures for cooperation against future threats. A galactic defense alliance? With humans as full partners, Queen Zylara confirmed. No more pretending to be the weak species that needs protection. Teho felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The other Genesis individuals will be relieved. Maintaining the deception was becoming difficult as more threats emerged. There will be challenges, Queen Zylara warned. Some species will not accept human equality easily. We will work through them together, Teho said. Queen Zylara finished her message and sent it to diplomatic channels across the galaxy. Then she turned back to her husband. One more question, she said. If the situation had been different, if revealing your abilities would have meant starting a war instead of ending one, would you have done it anyway? Teho considered this carefully. To protect you? Yes. I would have revealed everything and accepted the consequences. Queen Zylara's skin shifted to a warm golden color, the Veltharian expression of love and contentment. Then I choose to trust you, both the diplomat I married and the protector you really are. She moved closer to him, her forearms embracing him gently. But no more lies between us. No more lies, Teho promised. Outside their window, the stars shone peacefully. The immediate crisis was over, but Tejo knew this was just the beginning. Humanity had revealed its hidden strength to save the galaxy, and now they would have to learn to live as equals among species that had once seen them as pets. It would not be easy, but for the first time since leaving Earth, Tejo felt hopeful about the future. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, but it was also full of allies, who had proven they could work together when